In your fantasy football draft, you're going to have a ton of opportunities to draft wide receivers. Now, some of them will be good picks, some of them will be bad picks that you want to avoid, but there are 5 guys this year that I consider must-haves, and based on the last 6-7 years of me doing this, they're some of the best receivers I've seen maybe ever for fantasy. And maybe that's a little extreme, but let's break it down and see what you think. These are the 5 must-have receivers for 2024. And we begin with T. Higgins, and look, I know what you're thinking. Don't exit out of the video. I know what you're thinking. You're saying, seriously, T. Higgins is a must-have receiver, Sal? Come on. And trust me, I viewed this guy the same way a couple of months ago, back in April and May when I first started getting into some fantasy drafts. But since then, I've drafted like over 100 teams, and I keep targeting T. Higgins. And there's a lot of reasons for this when we go in and break it down. And you can see right here, he's not going as a 2nd or a 3rd round pick anymore. Heck, he's not even a 4th round pick. He's currently the 52nd overall player. That is a 5th round pick in fantasy football. Again, in past years, he was like a 2nd or 3rd round pick every single year. So the question then comes to mind, well, why is he going so late? And it could be easy to kind of point to what he did last year, and we'll pull it up right here. It could be easy to just say, oh, he finishes the wide receiver 40 last year. He stunk. It's a miracle he's even going in the 5th round now, right? Obviously, that's a little bit tongue-in-cheek because he was a lot better than this last year. Because him finishing as the wide receiver 40 just gives you absolutely no context. You would be mistaken if that's how you did all your fantasy research, and you probably wouldn't be winning your championships, getting to the playoffs. Maybe that's you. Well, let's try and get you situated better. He only played in 12 games last year, but in these 12 games, he only started and completed 9 of them, meaning that he left early or was limited by injury in 3 of them. But lucky for you, I went through those 9 games and looked at the splits when he was actually out there and quote unquote healthy finishing the game. And in those 9 games, Higgins averaged 8.3 targets and 14.1 fantasy points per game. And 14.1 fantasy points per game is right around a top 20 wide receiver where he usually finishes. And this is even more impressive when you consider in week 1, T. Higgins, if you owned him, you remember this. Look down here, 0 catches, 0 yards. Oh, he stunk, but he had 8 targets, right? He was one of only 5 wide receivers in the last 10 years in a regular season game to have at least 8 targets and no receptions, right? So that's obviously a fluke. He went on then to have a 20-plus point week the next game. This is factoring that in. He was a top 20 receiver when out there despite having a 0-point week. So you take that out and now he's all of a sudden like a borderline top 15 wide receiver. And this is also considering that Joe Burrow, his quarterback, was banged up to start the season and then didn't play the final 5 games of the season. But let's just give you a friendly reminder. In 46 career games with Joe Burrow, right? So there's been 11 games without him. In 46 games with him, he's averaging 14.1 fantasy points per game. Again, right around a top 20 wide receiver, but now Higgins is currently going, if you pull it up in drafts right now, in the 5th round, like we said, and this is around the wide receiver 30 range. So you're getting, in my opinion, a massive value because he was injured last year, first of all, and his quarterback was injured for basically the majority of the season, playing injured or out. So we get this wide receiver who's usually a 2nd or 3rd round pick. We're getting a value on him, and also the team dynamics have changed a little bit. If we pull up the team changes page from my fantasy blueprint that currently over 10,000 people have access to, and you can as well if you want to check it out, link down below, a bunch of other tools in there. You can see right here, Tyler Boyd, a longtime Cincinnati Bengal, he's now gone. This team's slot wide receiver, which means maybe you get T. Higgins moving into the slot a little bit more. Only played 19% out of the slot last year. Maybe you can get a little more slot usage. I think that'll be Jamar Chase's role, but there's an opportunity at least to get to maybe 30% of the slot snaps, meaning more easier receptions and yards after the catch. So in my opinion, assuming Joe Burrow isn't a completely changed person like some people are speculating from his wrist surgery, that's like the first ever, the ACL of the wrist or whatever it might be, I think he's going to be okay. Assuming that he's not bad, then I think that T. Higgins is going to have a fine season. Next up, we're talking about Christian Watson, who I believe is the Packers' #1 receiver. And look, the numbers just prove this. According to Fantasy Points data, Christian Watson leads the Packers in first read target shares each of the last 2 seasons. So that's with Aaron Rodgers and also last year when out there and healthy with Jordan Love. And last year, Watson was taken, if you can see right here, this is 2023 ADP. He finished up in the last final drafts of the year going as the 49th player off the board. So in many 12-team leagues, this is basically a 4th round pick, early 5th round pick. And this is while we had QB uncertainty. We didn't have Aaron Rodgers anymore. We didn't know what Jordan Love was going to look like, but now we don't have those issues. We know that Jordan Love is a quality quarterback. He was top 5 in quarterback efficiency the second half of the season. He was number 2 in passing touchdowns. He was a solid quarterback who almost took this team to the NFC Conference Championship, was just a couple of drives away last year. But despite all of this, we get Christian Watson now going. You saw last year he went as the 49th overall player. Now he goes as the 82nd overall player. He's going multiple rounds later, even though we now know that his quarterback is a borderline stud. And there are 2 reasons for this. You might be able to think of some of them, but let's break them down. Reason number 1 is the Packers have a lot of young, talented pass catchers, and reason number 2 is there's concerns around Watson's lingering hamstring issues. Now let's address these concerns and break each of them down. The first one is around the Packers' young pass catching core. Okay, I think this is a little bit overblown, and this is coming from somebody who is a former fan of the Green Bay Packers, still has a little bit of fandom, like when it gets to the playoffs and there's actually something on the stakes, you can say. But overall here, look, I get it. Jaden Reed was great last year, a 2nd round pick. He was a guy who looked like the #1 receiver receiver on their team. But why was that the case? Because other guys like Watson were injured. Specifically, Jayden Reed last year was not a full-time player for this team. No, when Christian Watson was healthy, it was Christian Watson, Romeo Doubs, and sometimes Dontavian Wicks rotating in as the outside receivers, not Jayden Reed. Jayden Reed was basically pigeonholed, as you can see right here. We'll pull it up. He was pigeonholed as a slot wide receiver, played only 57% of the snaps, 67% of the time out of the slot. He was not playing on the outside when Watson, Doubs, and also Dontavian Wicks were healthy. He was behind all three of those guys. And you might be saying to yourself, no, that's not what my already pre-established biases have told me and other people. Trust me, I've been looking into this. He was not an outside receiver when those guys were healthy, including in the postseason last year when these guys, Romeo Doubs had a great postseason, Dontavian Wicks when he was healthy, Christian Watson when he could actually get onto the field was looking good in the second half of the season. In the postseason, you saw Jayden Reed out there way less. I mean, he was not even having catches in some games or targets. He wasn't even on the field when they were using two wide receiver sets with two tight ends to run the ball more and try and milk a lead a little bit against the San Francisco 49ers in that divisional round. So I'm not too worried about Jayden Reed. We know what Romeo Doubs is. He's an outside receiver, a red zone body, a guy that they are trusting more and more these days, but I think it's going to be Christian Watson, always the guy when healthy, starting on the outside. He brings a unique talent profile, size and speed, and just an absolute monster out there when healthy. He brings something that nobody else can bring to the table. Now, sure, Dontavian Wicks is an exciting player, kind of like a sleeper in fantasy this year if you're paying attention. I think that he could steal snaps from Romeo Doubs, probably not Christian Watson, and now you're looking at a nice starting wide receiver set of Dontavian Wicks and Romeo Doubs, and when they go to three wide receiver sets, Jayden Reed, but he's not a starter in two wide receiver sets. So that's concern number one. I got a little fired up there. Apologize for that, but we're trying to give you the information. Concern number two is the hamstring issues that are going on with Watson, and they're a real thing. He's only been in the NFL for 2 years, and he's already had 3 hamstring issues, including a couple last year, and that's not even to account some of the other injuries that he's had off of those. But the good news is this offseason, he's identified the issue. One of his hamstrings was 20% weaker. He talked about this recently. There's a great thread you can find on Twitter. We've talked about it in the past as well. Basically this right here. Watson learned there was asymmetry in the level of strength in each of his legs, which can translate to injury. One leg is weaker than the other, so when you're pushing off on that weaker leg with more force from the other leg, you could get injured. But now he's saying he's starting to feel like he's getting back to 100%. He's now measured the difference. It was a 20% difference. Now it's down to like 6 to 7%, and they say naturally there'll be a couple of percentage difference. So this might actually be the solve to his problem. And if this sounds like a little bit witchcraft, no, this is just modern medicine. This was a research study backed by the NFL at the University of Wisconsin, the School of Medicine there. So this is a legit thing. So all of this context is why I like Christian Watson in the 7th round. Again, this guy was going basically in the 4th round last year when we had questions about his quarterback. Now we don't have those questions, and we're getting some of his injury concerns solved, but he's going rounds later. I don't buy it. Next up is a wide receiver who goes as the 3rd wide receiver drafted on his team, but I believe you could seriously argue that he should go as the 1st wide receiver drafted on his team. Because if you're telling me that Tank Dell, a second-year player who broke out in his rookie year, is now going in the 5th round of fantasy drafts despite having an elite quarterback, I'd be saying why. And then when you tell me the only reason why that's happening is because Stefon Diggs, who the team traded for and acquired, who is 31 years old, coming off of one of his worst seasons in the NFL, was brought onto this team, and that's why Tank Dell is going last behind Diggs, going a lot of picks, 20 picks behind Diggs, going after Nico Collins, which you can talk me into that, of course. I would say maybe this is a little bit crazy, and maybe, just maybe, we're getting a value on Tank Dell. Because if you don't know, let me break it down. Tank Dell last year entering the NFL, he had a great season before injury, an injury that ended his year, but what did he do last year in his rookie year? Oh, he goes out there and just ranks top 20 in fantasy points per game and the 14th most efficient wide receiver. Way better than anything Stefon Diggs was doing last year, that's all I'm saying. And the main pushback I'm getting is, oh, they have Nico Collins, outside receiver, of course, and they brought in Stefon Diggs. Tank Dell's not starting in 2 wide receiver sets. He's going to become like the Jayden Reed we were just talking about, not on the field in 2 wide receiver sets, meaning less snaps. But I would say, hold on a minute. Because Tank Dell played on the outside 70% of the time last year and had great success, was a top 15 efficiency receiver. He ranked 12th in average depth of target. 14.3 yards downfield was his average target. Again, that was good to great, literally top 12 in the NFL. He was dominating on the outside. Sure, he's a smaller receiver. Sure, he can win in the slot as well, but why are you going to fix or try and fix something that's not broken? So when I see this competition in Houston, I say, oh, the aging veteran in Stefon Diggs, that seems like a guy you probably throw in the slot at 31 years old, struggled last year, and he's on the field in 3 wide receiver sets, can still have a good season, maybe not pay off his 3rd round draft capital that he's going right now, but I think he would be the guy who's more likely, as not being in this offense before, not having success in it like Tank Dell last year, and also being a lot older, to go into the slot and lose 20 to 30% of the snaps. And I also think there's a case to be made that you could even argue Tank Dell should be the number one receiver on this team because here's something I'm pondering. If you look at the games last year, they only played 9 games together. You can check on my tweet. You can follow me there if you want more stats like this. 9 games together last year that they started and completed, Tank Dell and Nico Collins. In those games, Tank Dell averaged 16.5 fantasy points per game, while Nico Collins averaged 16.4. They had the exact same role, but for some reason now, Nico goes 36 picks before Tank Dell. If we're talking about value, give me Tank Dell. If we're talking about just which one you would rather have, I think it's a lot closer than people are expecting. And yes, I get it. They're totally different wide receivers. Nico Collins was also greatly efficient, especially downfield last year. Bigger body, this physical X receiver. So I get that they're different players, but I think people are just writing off Tank Dell right now. Now, before we get into this next young stud like a Tank Dell that people are just overlooking in the 4th round of fantasy drafts, you want to have him. I also want to ask you a question. Do you want to win your fantasy leagues? Simple as that. I've been asking you a couple times this offseason. Maybe if you're watching these videos, well, you just click this button because you can get risk-free access this year to the Fantasy Blueprint. And right here, how do you do it? Risk-free access through one of our 2 partners linked down below. There's a link in the description. I'll put up a QR code in a second, but you can get one of these here, or you can just go down here. If those don't work for you, those partners, for whatever reason, they should, but if they don't, there's another option for you down here. Now, over 10,000 people have used the Fantasy Blueprint. It has all the tools and analysis you need to help you prepare and win your fantasy draft, and then help you get to your fantasy playoffs all season long. Every single week, every day, I'm sending you another tool or piece of analysis to do just that. Rankings, waiver wire tiers, rest of season rankings, matchups, all this stuff. And like I said, it's risk-free if you sign up through one of our partners. It's just $10 for that entire year, so it comes down to a couple of pennies a day. And if you don't make your playoffs, you get that $10 right back, no questions asked. So to get access to the Fantasy Blueprint today, just scan the QR code on the screen or click the link in the description below. You know you're going to get it anyway, so before the prices increase, you might as well get it right now. Now, that guy who goes in the 4th round, who is a young stud, it's possibly my favorite pick in all of fantasy football, especially at the wide receiver position right now. That is Malik Nabers, the New York Giants rookie. And let's think about that for a second. He's a rookie, which I believe is partially why he's falling in drafts. He hasn't shown you it yet. He hasn't given you this proven upside, but as we've seen in a lot of cases in the past, that doesn't matter. Puka Nacua last year, Jamar Chase years before that, a bunch of running backs every single year. Right now, he goes as currently the 42nd overall player in round 4. And if you're not familiar with Malik Nabers, he's maybe one of the 5 or 6 best wide receivers that has come out of the NFL draft in the past decade, like up there with Marvin Harrison Jr. in this same draft class. Guys like CeeDee Lamb, guys like, who else? Jamar Chase of recent years. I mean, that's how good this guy is. You could see in college last year at LSU when all the attention was on him and he had to compete with another first-round receiver in Brian Thomas, puts up almost 1,600 yards, was the number 1 graded PFF wide receiver in the entire nation, ahead of one Marvin Harrison Jr., who went before him in the draft, who was one of the best talents ever. People are comparing him to the best talents in Julio Jones or Amari Cooper. That's who he profiles out like. You can see Marvin Harrison Jr., 4th overall in the NFL draft. Malik Nabers, 6th overall. A lot of draft analysts were saying that Malik Nabers would be easily, definitely the number 1 overall pick in any other draft at the wide receiver position, but even people are saying he should be above Marvin Harrison in this year because of what he can do after the catch and his explosiveness. So I find it a little interesting that Marvin Harrison goes as a top 15 overall player while Malik Nabers goes outside the top 40, and I understand some of the reasoning here, like people are just that much higher on Marvin Harrison, but I would argue that Malik Nabers has easier competition. Now, I know we can talk about the quarterback situation in a second, but there's Wan'Dale Robinson, a short area guy. We know what Darius Slayton is, a veteran who can win downfield sometimes but not consistently. Jalen Hyatt, who's kind of this boomer bust. In college, he was a slot deep threat, which doesn't really exist in the NFL. Could he transition in year 2 as a downfield receiver? Maybe, but Malik Nabers is by far and away more talented than all these guys. Kind of has what all of them have, a plus sum all together. I was like stumbling over my words there. I got so excited for this guy. I mean, hop off for a second. Jeez, pause. But then we can compare this to Marvin Harrison Jr., who it's not like he has any world beaters at the receiver position, right? Greg Dortch, Michael Wilson. Zay Jones, I think, is more talented than people let on. But there is Trey McBride. Trey McBride, who, again, I think is a tad overrated because of how he produced in fantasy. In real life, it's not like he was winning downfield often like guys like Sam Laporta or Kyle Pitts can do in the NFL. And yes, I know people don't like Kyle Pitts, but he does win downfield. Trey McBride was a guy who was just, catching screen passes, running a bunch, didn't have competition. But this is still somebody who in the middle of the field is going to earn targets where, like, there's really nobody on the Giants who could do that, or at least profiles out right now. Maybe it's Wan'Dale Robinson, but right now hasn't proved it. Look, I know the key difference between these two players is, like, I'd rather have Kyler Murray for sure in real life and even fantasy over Daniel Jones, of course, but I think people are just, like, overblowing Daniel Jones. Yes, he's coming off of an injury, but let's give it a second here. Because I still trust the head coach, Brian Daboll, the former Bills coach with Josh Allen, right? And if you look in his first season with Daniel Jones, what did he do to this quarterback? He made him a lot more efficient. Top 10 in overall efficiency. 8th in true passer rating. If you look at accuracy, he wasn't throwing down the field all that much, didn't have the talent to do so. Number 1 in true completion percentage. Okay, some of these stats can just be skewed because he wasn't throwing down the field that much, but he built an offense around Daniel Jones' strengths, and it worked 2 years back. The overall production and numbers might not have worked because his offensive line stunk. His surrounding pieces were as bad as they get at the wide receiver position when you're relying on Sterling Shepard to be your number 1 receiver after 6-7 injuries. All I'm saying is Daniel Jones, as long as he's not the dead last worst quarterback in the league and like right around the quarterback 18 to 22, I think Malik Nabers is going to have a must-have type season. Now, before we get into the next must-have veteran receivers, and these guys, one of them you can get super late. I'm shocked as to why. Over 60% of you aren't subscribed to the channel. My goal, as I've stated in the past, is to get that to 50% of the viewers to be subscribed to this channel by September 1st. So just take a couple extra seconds if you could right now. Hit that subscribe button, please, fellas, for me. Now, the next must-have receiver takes us to round 10 of drafts. And there's a couple of guys in the name, but the guy I'm going to point to is a veteran, and it is Tyler Lockett. I've mentioned him in the past before, but look, if you're telling me I can get Tyler Lockett in round 10, I'm listening. Because man, oh man, I just feel like everybody continues to sleep on this Seahawks offense. And I mean, I've talked to some people in person recently, and we're getting caught back up on fantasy football, right? Just people who like fantasy in general don't cover it like this, and they don't even realize what's happening in Seattle. And maybe you don't either, but this is a brand new coaching staff. It's not Pete Carroll and the boys and Shane Waldron, the offensive coordinator from last year and the year before anymore. No, this is a brand new coaching staff, and one that should get you pretty excited. It's going to be an experiment that should pay off. Like, the head coach is Mike McDonald. He comes over from the Ravens. Okay, I think he could be a solid head coach, a defensive-minded head coach, but this is the thing that's really impressive. They signed Ryan Grubb from Washington in college, so he's going to get to stay in the Pacific Northwest. Washington was like top 10 in every passing metric. They passed at a high rate. They passed downfield often. They were built on using 3 wide receiver sets. They're going to pass the ball and play at a fast pace, which is not at all what the Seahawks did last year with Pete Carroll and Shane Waldron. They ranked dead last in pace of play. They were not a fast team. They did not get a lot of plays per game off. Ryan Grubb is going to get a lot of plays off and throw deep. And despite Tyler Lockett, as you can see right here, turning 32 years old this year, I still think that this is going to benefit him, because last year he showed, again, no signs of slowing down. He played in every single game. He's never missed more than 1 game in a season in his NFL career, averaged over 7 targets per game. He was efficient as well. Everything looked good. And it wasn't just the overall numbers. He was actually useful in fantasy. Last year, he had 7 different starts with a top 20 finish, but despite all of this, despite having 7 different top 20 finishes, he now goes 118th overall. That's the wide receiver 51 in drafts, which he's basically never finished that poorly before. People are just projecting him to. He's literally going, if we scroll up here, he's going like a round after Jameson Williams, who's never done anything in the NFL. And maybe with an expanded role he could this year, but I'm still skeptical. And I get some of the pushback. Oh, DK Metcalf is there. Yeah, I think he's the number 1 receiver on this team too. I think he's a solid 3rd round pick in fantasy football, but he also goes right now like 7 rounds earlier than one Tyler Lockett. JSN, a 2nd-year wide receiver, is there. Yeah, but he's basically, since college at Ohio State and the NFL last year, he's been kind of pigeonholed into this slot role, and that's just kind of what he is. Can he win on the outside, beat Tyler Lockett out there? I'm skeptical. Now, you might be wondering, okay, well, if Tyler Lockett's Sal, you're hyping him up, he had a fine season last year, he was earning targets, he was efficient, then why the heck did he finish 37th overall? And I'm glad you asked, because I thought the same thing, and I said, what the heck went on last year? Now, there's a couple of reasons for this. I've already stated one of them, and it has to do with the overall offense. They played at an extremely slow pace. They didn't throw the ball all that much per game. And Geno Smith last year, although he had a good season 2 years ago, last year it wasn't atrocious by any means, but this right here, he faced pressure at an insane rate. The 4th most pressured throws. So when you're getting pressured, when you're not able to throw downfield because a blitz is coming, you're not going to have as many explosive plays, which that is a reason why Tyler Lockett last year, if we pull it over here, he averaged just 11.3 yards per reception, his lowest number in the past 4 to 5 years. He wasn't seeing as much downfield usage because the offensive line and Geno Smith's pocket presence wasn't there. Let me catch my breath for a second, take a drink of water, because I just laid the absolute facts and gave you guys some game. I'm spitting game right now. And another reason why Lockett, he doesn't finish as a top 24 wide receiver or a top 20 receiver like he always does, basically. He only had 5 touchdowns, which kind of sounds like a decent number, but every single year you could see 9 touchdowns, 8 touchdowns a year before that. This was his fewest touchdown total in the last 6 to 7 years. The dude just has a nose for the end zone, and even last year, in probably the worst case scenario, he still finishes the wide receiver 37, and reminder, now he goes as the wide receiver 51 with the improved offensive environment and coaching staff. Hopefully with the improved offensive line to help Geno Smith throw deeper, and just a better fit overall. Geno Smith in the Michael Penix offense from last year in college with Ryan Grubb, the new offensive coordinator, it makes a lot of sense. So I think Lockett in the 10th round is just an absolute steal, an absolute smash play. He's a guy who, like, at that point shouldn't be there. He should be like a 6th or 7th round pick. Now I want to throw a bonus into this video, and I call Drake London a must-have wide receiver bonus because a lot of you just aren't going to be able to get him because he goes in round 2. He's currently going as the 18th overall player. If you have like a 1st or a 2nd overall pick, he's probably going to be gone by the time you come back. But for the majority of you, I want to talk about him here because in the 2nd round, and even at the end of the 1st round, if you want to get spicy, in my opinion, he's a must-have player. Because I'm personally even higher on him. To me this year, he is a top 12 overall player because he no longer has Arthur Smith, a guy who loved to run the ball, one of the highest rates in the NFL the last 4 years. No, that guy is now gone. And he's been replaced by Zach Robinson as the offensive coordinator, who, if we scroll through his past, he's basically spent his entire NFL career, as you can see right here on Wikipedia, as a member of the Los Angeles Rams, the passing game coordinator last year, and now he's going to come over to Atlanta. So you're going to get a lot more passing, a lot more motion, a lot more 3 wide receiver sets, and instead of ranking in the bottom 3 in pass rate like the Falcons did last last year, you're going to probably get in the top half of the league, maybe even top 12 or 10. And then, of course, there's the fact that he's ditching his shitty quarterbacks, for lack of a better term, and Desmond Ridder. I'm sorry to the Ridder family watching this. I know you are at home. And guys like Taylor Heineke. And instead, he's getting Kirk Cousins. Coming off of a torn Achilles, sure. We'll see how that affects him. But for the most part, I think he's going to be fine. He's not a mobile quarterback. Doesn't really require to be super agile, I guess you can say. His pocket awareness should be fine, even with the torn Achilles. I might have said ACL the first time, but it was a torn Achilles injury. So this is the best quarterback by far of his career. And Kirk Cousins, basically the last 6-7 years of his career, has averaged at least one top 12 wide receiver during that time. So I look at Drake London, who is again a former top 10 overall pick in 2022, the number 8 overall pick, and these types of guys who have been successful, like London has the first 2 years. You might look at his fantasy finishes if we pull them up and say, how has he been successful? A wide receiver 43, wide receiver 42. Go look at his catchable targets. Go look at this right here. He's only scored 2 and 4 touchdowns. And that's not because of him. That's because of the offense, running the ball out in the red zone, not getting to the red zone. But if you look at his yards per route run, his ability to earn targets, all these are pointing to a guy who could be a wide receiver 1 easily in fantasy. And I believe the first thing that Zach Robinson is going to notice is, yeah, this dude is 6'4", 213 pounds, and he's actually gained some size since then, probably closer to 220 as his playing weight now, but 6'4". Yeah, when we get down to the red zone, a lot more, because we will this year. Kyle Pitts sure will be involved, but Drake London is going to be a priority, and I won't be shocked if this guy catches minimum 7, maybe 8+ touchdowns this year. So these are the 5 and a bonus must-have wide receivers for this year. But I know you're already thinking, what about the running backs? Maybe the most important position in fantasy. Well, I've already got you covered. Oh, over here is the must-have running backs, 5 of them, and a bonus player for this season. Go ahead and check it out. And again, hey, if you're enjoying this content, continue to tell your friends. I know you don't want to tell them the secrets. Tell your friends. At least hit the subscribe button. I appreciate you all a ton. And check out this video over here. Appreciate you. Peace.